Hello and welcome to the webinar on EPR transition, making it work for your community. I understand that it's also the last day of school, so thank you very much for prioritizing your attendance on this webinar. I just want to give a bit of background on how this webinar came about. Earlier this year, ARMA hosted a series of EPR transition webinars. And from that, it really showed that there was interest in more community-to-community conversations about EPR. And that's where the RCA felt we could provide that platform to help our members and other Alberta communities talk to other communities who have gone before us. And the timing of this webinar aligns with the release of the term sheets and the scope of work documents from Circular Materials. It has nothing to do with the end of school year. We've assembled a group of panelists to share their experiences as they have all recently gone through the EPR transition in their respective jurisdictions. You'll hear about unique scenarios with the intent that it exemplifies for our Alberta municipalities that the servicing agreements with the pro and the decisions on whether to opt in and opt out may look differently for everyone. We hope you find this webinar helpful, and at the end we'll ask you if you'd like to see more support from the RCA and if you have ideas what that might look like as we all transition to EPR. Now I'll just give the land acknowledgement. The RCA resides on treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 within Alberta. We respectfully acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keeper and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting, and we pledge to continue to protect it. So today's webinar, we have the agenda here. We'll start with a refresher on Alberta's transition to EPR for PPP. Then we'll have an overview of how EPR regulations are similar and different, so a comparison between the different provinces that are represented here. And we'll hear from our speakers. We'll host a moderated Q&A session, and then we'll release you back to your lunch hour if you're in the Alberta time zones. I am pleased to introduce our speakers and moderator, and I'd like to thank Dillon Consulting Limited for sponsoring this session. So the first speaker, I'll introduce all of them, and then we'll pass it to our moderator. So Melissa Murray is from the Township of Algonquin Highlands. That's in Ontario. And she's going to help us learn about EPR transition for a rural municipality with a depot-only collection. Depot-only. And to provide recycling services through an agreement with Circular Materials. Isabelle Godin from Kent Regional Services Commissions. We're going to hear about the transition experience that they went through as a service provider to Circular Materials. It's a little bit different. Managing curbside waste for 7 municipalities in Eastern New Brunswick. Deanna Dakin from Waterloo, Ontario. We're going to hear about this upper tier municipality's recent experience, and maybe we'll learn what upper tier means. It's a term we don't necessarily use here. In transitioning blue box responsibilities to Circular Materials and how it affected the waste management services that the region provides for its 7 lower tier municipalities. So the lower tier municipalities are 3 cities and 4 townships. And Beth Goodger is a waste management consultant working from Dillon's Hamilton office. She has over 36 years of municipal solid waste experience and transitioned from municipal government to consulting in 2019. She's been assisting municipalities in change management, planning for transition of recycling program responsibilities to producers, and she is a certified management certified change management practitioner. So we're glad to have Beth on board to help us moderate this session, and I'll pass it over to Beth.
Thanks very much, Jen. It's a pleasure to have Dylan Consulting and our team supporting today's workshop. And some of you may remember me and my colleague Sydney Baker from the workshops that we did back for ARMA in February, March of this year, and Charlotte Banks from our Calgary offices on the call today, and will be helping out with the Q&A. So it's one of the things that came out of that workshop was the importance of peer-to-peer support, and that's how this workshop came about, so that we're able to connect you with some colleagues in other provinces. So if some of these slides that I'm going to show you now about the overview of the regulation are familiar, you have seen them before if you've participated in those ARMA workshops back earlier this year. And those were about developing the transition plan and getting ready for transition. So hopefully those have worked for you in getting ready and the planning process. So in terms of what's included in the regulation, this should all be very familiar to everyone now. And we're talking about the single-use products, packaging, and paper products. And I'm probably not going to say PPP anymore in the presentation, just refer to it as this is the stuff that's in your current recycling programs, however that looks like today. And also to note that there will be some additional materials that are going to be recycled over and above what you're currently providing. And it will also be important for your community to confirm if there's any differences in materials that you're currently collecting in your recycling program versus what's some things that might not be included post-transition. So the producers will have the responsibility as of April 1st, 2024 for the new recycling system, and Circular Materials is the only pro-registered for Alberta. And as Jen mentioned, you've got some hot off the press information, which has really filled in the gaps of what's was unknown when we first offered the workshops for ARMA back earlier this year. So core thing is that the single family residence and multifamily are included, and it excludes any IC&I. And I'm sure most of you on the call webinar today are in the phase one, that you're already offering a recycling program in your respective community. So I won't spend too much time on the phase two discussion. This is definitely an updated slide about the timing for the phase one communities and your April 1st, 2025 transition. And the Circular Materials website has great information now about how the services are going to be provided and the options that you have, the opt-in service model, that you become a service provider to Circular Materials, and or the opt-out service model that you're fully transitioning, noting that there still would be collaboration with your community on P&E. So you're going to need to decide what you're doing by August 1st of 2024. As Jen mentioned, the term sheets for the master service agreements and the statement of work for collection are on their website, and comments are due by July 10th. You need to decide if you are opting in to be a service provider, to have an approved agreement by your council by the end of October, and a finalized contract by the end of November. So if you haven't already, I really encourage you to visit the Circular Materials website. And there's a lot of great resources, and we do have the contact information at the end of the presentation. And there's also a municipal working group that will provide really good resources and help so you understand what the requirements are from Circular Materials. To give you a bit of a context of what you're going to be seeing in the presentations, I wanted to give an overview of the context of EPR regulation in Canada. So in the past, system, the municipalities are in the lead, the communities in the lead, and every program is different depending on markets and however your program evolved for your recycling or blue bag or blue box program. And I'll go over this, but producers have had varying roles for the recyclable materials in the past system. So this is a huge change for communities moving forward to EPR. And in this new EPR system, the producers are in the lead. The great thing is that it will be the same program across the province that accepts the same material. So it doesn't matter if you move from one community to another, it'll all be the same. And in your case, the municipality, the community can act as a service provider to the producer. This isn't the case necessarily in all the provinces. This slide gives you a quick snapshot of the current status of EPR in Canada, and on the left side, the provinces that have already transitioned. BC, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Ontario is actually in progress. Your program in Alberta is in progress, along with Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and the Yukon. And there are also some programs coming forward in the rest of the provinces and territories. So it won't be long before we see a full system across Canada. In terms of what you're seeing in terms of the three between Alberta and the presenters, the panelists that you're seeing today, your timing is pretty short, starting for April 2025 and the second phase in October 2026. Ontario is in progress. The first program started a year ago in transition and is happening over 3 years. So the full system is going to be in place as of January 1st, 2026. And in New Brunswick, the transition has happened between November 2023 and November of this year. So actually in progress as well, as you'll hear a bit more from Isabelle on that. In the prior system, compared to producers being fully responsible, it will be in Alberta, it was all on your dime. So this is a big change to have that money coming into your communities and becoming a producer responsibility. Ontario had a 50-50 funding model, and New Brunswick had a similar approach to Alberta. Across all three provinces, Circular Materials is the main producer responsibility organization. Ontario is a bit different, having multiple pros. So there are 2 other pros in Ontario operating. So that's a bit of a difference that Ontario has to deal potentially with. There are 3 different options. In terms of materials, the single-use plastics are included for all 3. The deposit return program and beverage containers are a bit different. Ontario did not have this program prior to the transition, so that is different than what you're experiencing in Alberta, and was also the same case for New Brunswick, not included. The collection requirements, they're all pretty similar. Some nuances in terms of Ontario and New Brunswick for congregate or facility type of locations, which makes it a bit interesting in the planning, which I'm sure you'll hear from our 3 presenters. So that gives you the overview, and I'm going to now turn things over to Melissa to start hearing about a depot-based community and her experiences in Algonquin Highlands. Over to you, Melissa.
Thank you very much. Just give me a moment here and get my screens coordinated. Are we good there? Everybody can see the presentation there? Excellent. So thank you. as I've been introduced, Melissa Murray, I'm the environmental manager for the Township of Algonquin Highlands, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be sharing with you some of our experiences with our transition to extended producer responsibility. I'll just explain, we often call it the Blue Box program and Blue Box materials. That would be the equivalent of your packaging and paper products, which are the PPE. So that's just a bit of clarification. So a little bit about Algonquin Highlands. We are located central Ontario, and if you're familiar with Ontario at all, and know about Algonquin Park or the Muskoka area, we are the forgotten land in between, and we are just as beautiful, much less populated, and a lot better. So we have a huge seasonal population boom where we go from about 25,000 people to more than 10,000. So we're just in the midst of that change right now. We have quite a large land area, about 1,000 kilometers, a tiny population density, less than 2.6 people per kilometer. And interestingly enough, we have no population center. So we have no towns, we have no villages, we have a couple of little hamlet areas, and we have no commercial center. So we have one village, I would say, and the village of Dorset, and we actually only have half of that in the Township of Algonquin Highlands. And if you ask me where our major intersection is, we actually don't have any major intersections in our township. We have roads that run down the eastern side or the western side and the eastern, and all side roads off of that. So very rural, very remote in that sense. So our municipality is a lower tier municipality, and you heard Deanna in the Waterloo is a upper tier municipality. So we are the lower tier poor municipalities in the county of Haliburton, and we are one of those. Our municipality waste-wise is served by 4 waste management sites, and 3 of those have active operations. And unusually enough, we actually still have landfill capacity remaining in our municipality. We have absolutely no curbside collection. All residences and businesses have to bring their material to our depot sites for drop-off. And of note, we don't have any private waste companies that serve our area. There's one quite small company that serves the county, and then more larger companies that serve the region. So it's challenging to get waste management services in our community, and we rely on a lot of partnerships and discussions with our surrounding communities to see what they're doing, to see if if a company serving the adjacent municipality might be able to extend their services to us. Most of the larger outside of the Haliburton County to our south, we have a larger region, and to the west, that's Muskoka, so a little bit larger, and both of those are a little bit less remote, so have some more services. And on the same, not a lot of people, not a lot of site visits, and very, very small volume of material, 361 tons of Blue Box materials. So that's our printed paper and packaging, and plastic and metal containers, food and beverage containers. So that's probably the contamination level of an average municipality, and much less material than a medium-sized community would collect in a day is our full year. So just a tiny amount there. And so tiny, but not insignificant. And obviously for our residents, we're just as important as every other community. So our transition to extended producer responsibility, we have officially transitioned to that on April 1st of 2024. So we're still fairly new in the process, but I'm going to sort of work backwards. It's been a long process to get here. So starting well before 2019 was discussion about extended producer responsibility. The current sort of model and regulation for extended producer responsibility did come to the table in 2019. And we started discussing with council that far back. So our current form of the agreement and the process began with a lot of data collection and submission to what RIPRA, which is the I'm gonna get this wrong, I know, in saying it, the Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority. And they started out, so they're the regulatory organization, and they started collecting data before we even had pros and that sort of thing on the table. The first drafts of our contracts came forward in the spring of 2022, and we signed a contract with Circular Materials in November of 2023. There was a lot of discussion and a lot of variations of the contracts. The original contracts we saw were master services agreements with statements of work, and our current agreement is a much different form, and I'll talk a little bit more about that further. The most challenging, I would say, of the transition process was probably the legal review, and I'll give you a little bit more insight into that. So the agreement that we currently have with Circular Materials is called a depot operations agreement. As I mentioned, the original things we were looking at were master services agreement and then statement of work for a depot collection. The depot operations agreement came about through a lot of discussion and a lot of education, I think, on everybody's part as to what depots were and how they operated and how contracts with depots were managed. So the depot operations agreement in principle is the municipality is providing collection services for materials, but we don't handle any of the hauling, processing, recovery, any of that side of things. So we operate the depot sites and we staff them, and that's about it. So we collect the materials. Once they get into bins, the bins are not included in our portion of the contract. Those are provided by the pro. That's where our responsibility ends. So we were really thankful that we worked with someone at Circular Materials who was familiar, had property in the area, so was at least familiar with the depot and rural environment. So we worked with her a lot to get an understanding of how depot operations work. And I stress this to you because keep in mind that, you know, the folks that you're talking to in discussions and negotiations may not have any understanding of how what your model of service is, how things operate, and getting that part across took a lot of time. And you know, we offered to have people come in and visit. We did virtual tours and that sort of thing, just to give an idea of how it works. And in discussion with lots of other municipalities, we realized that there's, particularly in the depot model, there is so much variety in how things are offered, from, you know, unstaffed sites with at the side of a road to ours are more for full service. We have staffing. They're well-established sites and associated with landfills, but all kinds of one of the municipalities in our area has depots that are located on islands, which are only serviced by barges. So that's a whole other interesting conversation there. So some of the challenges, like I said, was saying the lack of understanding of the depot operations was probably the first thing that we came across. And then some of the more getting into the contract details were challenging because they were on much larger scale and in much more complexity than one we were used to dealing with, and then that we were able to deal with. So there were so many terms and conditions that wouldn't apply to us, but it wasn't clear in agreements that they wouldn't apply. And so there was a lot of discussion about that. So another challenge we had was in speaking with council is the question is, well, if we opt out, what else can we do? What are we going to see if we do that? And nobody had the answer to that question. And really from a service perspective, it was very difficult to say, like, if we opted out and we didn't have blue box collection services, materials collected at our depot sites, would our residents even bother to go somewhere else? How inconvenient could that be potentially? And how much of our municipality would have no services there at all? Because there's no obligation in our regulation to have services for for recycling for blue wax collection in the same location as waste is collected. We just have to have the same number of sites. So we could have, we have 4 sites spread throughout our municipality. We could have had 4 sites all located in a small area, maybe along a highway or something like that, which would have been very inconvenient for our residents. So it was important for us to look at that and look at what could happen if we opted out. And then the next question of, what happens if we opt in. So one big challenge we had, and again, back to the question of, do you want to opt in or out? I think many of you have made that decision already, but we didn't have a lot of details. We initially were asked to make a decision about a contract that was included hauling, but we didn't know to where. So that was obviously not possible. We couldn't sign an agreement saying we would agree to haul materials to a site that was yet to be determined. We couldn't even go to subcontractors to find out how that would work. We were asked to make decisions about contracts when we didn't know what our compensation would be. We didn't know what legal terms were. There were still items that were on the table, but they wanted to have agreements in principle, which was very, very challenging for our council, to understand, and our staff to work with. So something I just wanted to mention, and this has come up in conversations that I've had with other folks, is that the fundamental change that we had to get understanding of and on board with was the role of a municipality. And for us, most of our municipal businesses is as the municipality, as as an employer, as a client, as a contract holder, we're the ones writing contracts, issuing RFPs. Being on the other side of the table in the role of a contractor and providing services and evaluating contracts from that perspective was very, very difficult. And in chatting with our legal counsel made me realize that it wasn't just us as a small community that were in that boat, but that really that fundamental change was across the board for all municipalities. And it was something that was being struggled because with no precedent about how a contract it works, what the risks are, what the liabilities are, we were constantly, asking our legal counsel, is this, what do we need to know about this contract? And they really said, we can't say for sure, because the only way we can say for sure is we can look at precedent as what's happened before. And these sorts of contracts really haven't existed in the Ontario, at least, municipal framework. So they were new. We have some smaller agreements for services with other pros and other materials, but this was a much larger, much higher value contract than any of those were, and obviously had a lot more terms and conditions. So getting people understanding that was challenging, and then looking at, okay, as a municipality, where do we fit in that? So as a contractor, what do we need to change in our operations to ensure that we are providing services that don't put us at risk and don't have a liability? So some of the discussions that came through that were things like, how do we ensure that the hauler that the pro had hired coming onto our property had insurance, had health and safety and things like that. So those were some of the discussions to ensure that we were covered from their perspective as well. How I'm doing for time here. Couple points, just what was important to our, and I say successful transition. I'll address that in my next slide. One of my first point here might be too late to say because you're already well into the process, but everyone I talk to and I say, if you could tell people one thing about this process, everybody says, make sure you start early, like start finding out information, start talking to your council, start talking to your senior management teams as early as you possibly can, because it's a long process and there's a lot to go through, and the earlier you can start and the more informed that you can keep people as the process goes along, the less challenges you're going to have when you come to having to make decisions and that sort of thing. as just as important as that is know your programs and know your data and have good financial information. And it is so important when you come to the table and are looking at a contract or an agreement, or whether you want to opt in or out, to know exactly what all the components of your programs are, who your contractors are, what even, you know, contract dates and details and opt-out clauses for them, and data, how much material you have, what your contamination levels are, your sorting processes, the cost of your staffing, the cost of running your sites, all of your contract costs. Because when you come to the table to talk to a pro about putting that contract together, you need to know what you have to offer, and what you need in order to provide or not to provide that service. So those three things. So what you have, what you need, and what you can offer, really put the package together. And if you have that firmly, then you have a negotiating stance. So I'm just the point there, prepared for that shift in municipal role. I mentioned already. And my last one, protect your own interests. It's interesting, you know, we were used to dealing with municipal associations and working groups and that sort of thing, where even our stewardship agreements and that sort of thing were designed to be in the best interest of the municipality. These are providing, you know, the best that we can have for your residents, the best we can have for the environment. In coming into commercial agreements, like we were with transition, we really had to take a step back and say, hey, we need to know what our own interests are. And that's back to what you have, what you need, and what you can offer. And we are the only ones who are responsible for protecting that. Nobody else. And I don't mean to be negative about a pro, but they have their own interests to protect. And that's all. They're not looking out for the good of your community. And it's interesting to hear from other communities we talk to in meetings and that sort of thing, where people are asking, you know, well, what are you going to do for us? And you can sort of hear in the background, well, we don't need to do anything for you. You're providing a service to us, or we're taking over a service for you, and we're providing a service to your residents. So that's part of that municipal shift there. So was it successful? I would say so far so good. Our residents weren't aware of any change in the services that they received. There's been no change in how the municipalities administered the program. We've learned so much in this process, and we'll take those learnings into other contracts, into other negotiations we have, into other programs that are coming up. Part of the success of it, and I think important to keep in mind, there's a lot of staff time needed. It wasn't a lot of time all at once, but it was the death of a million cuts, little bits here, constant, and for a long period of time, you know, once a week, every day, reviews, contracts, conversations. And I can't say 100% success, because there's still a lot of uncertainty that remains. We won't have full transition to our new regulation until January 1st of 2026. And we don't have a lot of the details of what that's going to look like yet. And I'm happy to answer any questions at this, but if some things come up and you want to reach out to me, by all means, my contact information is available. And that's it.
Thanks, Melissa. We'll move on to Isabelle now. And Melissa, if you want to check out the chat function, there is a specific question for you that you could probably answer now. And I'm sure we'll come to some of that in the Q&A. But Isabelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Beth. There's that. And all right, you can all hear me correctly. So I will apologize in advance. I had the privilege to visit Alberta for the very first time last week, and I brought a cold as a souvenir. So I may need to stop a few times to cough and clear my throat, but I'll do my best to make it as seamless as possible for you guys. So I'm here today to talk about the EPR transition in New Brunswick, talking about obviously the experience in Penn County. So this what I'm going to share with you is not representative of all of what was experienced in our province. We were fortunate to be in phase 2, which I will touch on a bit later, but I think it paints a broad idea of how it went in our province. So just to put things in perspective, if you're not too familiar with the region, the Kent Regional Service Commission is an area in eastern New Brunswick, a bit north of the city of Moncton, like northeast. And if you're familiar, we have the wonderful Kissibugwak National Park in our territory right there. That is wonderful all year long to visit. But we are comprised of 16 municipalities, 1 rural district, and 3 First Nations. We manage collection contracts for the garbage, recycling, and organic on almost all of the territory since 2016. There is 1 municipality that retained its collection contract, but worked with us in the negotiation aspect with recycling materials. So they voted that we had the power to negotiate on their behalf so that the whole region could speak as one. So we have a little over 19,000 households spread across almost 5,000 square kilometers. Huge territory, very little population. We're considered the most rural region in New Brunswick since we don't have any city center, only small towns and villages. So the Kent Regional Service Commission since October 2016 has a mandatory residential waste sorting system that we call the 3-stream program. So it introduced the use of clear bags for waste that is destined for landfill. Before that, we had like a wet, dry system for blue bags and green bags that was being used by residents on a voluntary basis across the region. But since 2016, we took over the beginning of 2016, the contract, and then in fall 2016, we implemented this mandatory sorting system that requires from our haulers to have a stick compactor to collect 2 colors of bags per week. So green, organic is collected every week, and we alternate between the clear and blue. So 1 week is green and blue, the other is green and clear, etc. So even today, the same system is still in place in the region. So a timeline in New Brunswick, I'll go very quickly here because that's the part before we were very involved. So the change in the legislation in New Brunswick was made in 2021. Recycle New Brunswick launched an RFP in 2022. Then Certain Materials submitted a plan in October 2022, and it took a few months for Certain Materials and Recycle NB to negotiate the terms of the plan until it was approved in May 2023. And I'll say it right now, one of the things they were not agreeing upon was the timeline. While Certain Materials wanted to have more time to do the work and the transition, the province of New Brunswick and Recycle New Brunswick said, no, we will do it within this set amount of time. So the implementation plan was adopted and went into 2 phases. So the phase 1 implementation will be completed by November 1st, 2023 in the region or the municipalities that decided to opt in as a service provider, and May 1st, 2024 for those that opted out. And there was 6 regions, basically the western part of the province, that was in phase 1. And then in phase 2, the implementation started on May 1st, 2024 if the municipality or the region decided to opt in, and will come into effect in November 1st if they opted out, which is the other part, the other half of the province on the eastern part. So for a bit of a context, you have a map of New Brunswick. Kent County or Kent Region is situated right here, number 6. And so this is how the province was divided when it came to phase 1 and phase 2. So as you can see, phase 1 is completely launched by now, and phase 2, only the region that opted in are included with the program as of today. and the rest will join in November 2024 for those who opted out. So how did it go? That's the big question that everyone wants to know. So I'll go by phase. So we'll talk about phase one first. So by the time the SO and the MSA were ready and launched, phase one entities, municipalities or RSCs only had 44 calendar days. That's not business days, that's calendar days to make a decision regarding opting in or out. And if you were a Francophone community, you had even less time because you only received the SO and MSA on June 12th instead of June 6th. And the decision must have, like, the intent had to be worded, like put into word by July 21st for the phase one region. So you can imagine 44 calendar days to get a legal advice on this agreement, tough luck, not easy. So, as you can imagine, most municipalities in phase one opted out. When I talk with colleagues across the province, they shared that the quick turnaround to make a decision and also the 3% contamination rate penalties were to blame for most of the region opting out. There was too many uncertainties, and there was even such a reluctance at first to put into writing the procedure to evaluate the contamination rate and how certain materials would work with the service provider to lower the contamination before going into penalties. So since there was a hard time, it was hard to get that into writing. They kept reassuring us during Zoom meetings, but never wanted to put anything in writing. Kind of put some pressure on municipalities that they didn't want to have to deal with. So fortunately for our region, the Kent region, we were in phase two. So I don't have a lot to talk about the experience for phase one, except that it was extremely rough. And we were lucky in phase two to learn from what happened in phase one to make a better decision. So for phase two, as I said, we profited from the experience of phase one entities because the SO and the MSA were circulated across the province at the same time. So phase one has 44 business days. We had until I think December to make a decision. So from June to December instead of June to July. Lots and lots of more time for our region, thank God. And certain materials only really started reaching out to the phase two communities about in September to start negotiating the terms of the SO and the MSA. So, as I said, it had to be submitted by mid-December. So just a quick email to say that this community or this RSC or this municipality wants to opt in, or if you don't answer, or if you say you opt out, again, it's a done deal and they will take care of getting in your contact by themselves. So what happened that we did not expect is, for Kent, for example, we decided in December that we would opt in. So we say, okay, we have the intention of opting in. We will wait until we get the real agreement with our information, like the rates you pay for us and everything before signing it, obviously, but we have the intention of working with you. What happened then is in late January, both documents were drastically changed, and they removed all mentions of contamination rate penalties, which was, as you may remember, the biggest issue that municipalities didn't want to have to deal with, and the main reason why they opted out. So at that point, some municipalities said, hey, that was our biggest issue. That was our biggest problem. Now that it's removed from the agreement, when we opt in, we're ready to work with you. And certain materials said no. As you can imagine, frustration, lots of frustration that we can observe in New Brunswick because of that. So now we're in June, the end of June, almost July. What I can tell about our experience in the Kent RSC, we opted in. The transition happened seamlessly for residents on May 1st, 2024. We didn't really do a big deal about it. We didn't want to confuse the residents. We wanted them to know that we were still in charge of collection as a service provider for certain materials, and we'll slowly do some introduction of the new materials that will be added to our list of recyclables thanks to the program, and fade out some material that we are accepting right now, but will not be part of the program after the transition period is done in December 2026. Because yes, every region will be transitioned by November 2024, but they keep a status quo of how we operate until December 2026. After that, we'll see what's going to happen. Your guess is as good as mine. So at this point, we have promotion and education efforts that are ongoing in our region and other region in New Brunswick to reduce contamination rates and for collection of materials that are newly added, as I mentioned. So from what was written in the agreement and all, audits by certain materials will be done twice a year at a minimum. The results will declare municipalities RSCs in that respect. And then they will work with the municipality to reduce the contamination rate if it's over the 3%, which obviously it will be, and do follow-up to the contamination reduction plan if needed. So that's what we wanted to have in written form that was added in the MSA and SO at some point in 2023. But now that's how they will operate without any financial penalties if you don't see a reduced contamination rate. So that's what we're working on right now. I think they're making their audits right now at the MRF in Moncton to have like a baseline, and then later in 2024 we should have a first overview of what's our contamination rate. We have an idea right now, but it's hard to say because since Kent region does not operate its own MRF or its own landfill or its own sorting station, everything is directly hauled to Moncton, mixed with 2 other regions in New Brunswick. So we have a contamination rate for all 3 regions, but not just for Kent. So that's something that we're eager to learn more about. But I'm pretty certain that it's way over 3%. So all that being said, obviously it's really early in the process. It's been 2 months and we haven't seen a lot of changes yet. So I will talk about my recommendations regarding what to do during the negotiation and all, but I can tell you like this was successful, this was bad. We regret our decision. Really, it's hard to say at that moment in time. But what I can say is that this is a massive change in the way we operate. It was mentioned in the presentation before mine. It requires a lot of time. And I think that's where the government of New Brunswick might have dropped the ball when they forced circular materials to do it, all of this so quickly, and they rushed municipalities that I don't know if you're aware were created in January of 2023 because New Brunswick went through a major local governance reform. So some CAOs, some municipalities were created on January 1st and had to make these decisions in such a short amount of time when they had no idea what they were getting into. So the timing was awful. But at the end of the day, it's been done. And obviously, we would have loved to have more time to do all of this more properly. So what I can say is be transparent with your council. Speak regularly with mayors and councillors about the upcoming transition. What does it mean for the residents? What does it mean for your population? Obviously talk about the financial impact if you opt in, opt out, but how will this transition affect the residents? At the end of the day, you want to have the little smallest impact possible on everyday life of your residents. If they're willing to do it, and from our experience, they were more than willing to do it, invite the materials to speak with your elected officials during a public meeting so that these questions or answers or like just so that they can voice their concern and maybe be reassured or maybe confirm that the opinion is not for us. So in our way, because we manage collection contracts for 7 entities, we decided to facilitate 2 meetings between the municipalities and certain materials so that they could explain everything. It started with really the basics. What is a PPP and why are we having this conversation? Because even our counselors had no idea what was going on. Like, they're not the experts. In a way, we are, because we're the ones dealing with them. So share that knowledge with them and make it as simple as possible. So obviously be transparent about what they could gain, what they could lose, what are the risks, and to make sure that they make a informed decision. Also talk with your haulers. If you have contacts already, talk with them, get them involved in that conversation. You know that your cost for collection is X. Talk with your haulers and say, okay, if I was to just remove that part of the collection, the blue bins, the blue bags, whatever, what would be the impact? Like, what would be the cost for you to do collection for us? Would there be a reduction? Would it be more because we still do collection like us of organic every week anyway? And also help them just for just a giggle, and ask, like, what would it cost just to do the collection of the recyclable materials? That will give you a good idea of what it would cost for the materials to offer the collection by themselves. So that way you can have a better understanding of what it represents for certain materials to work with you or on by themselves, and weigh the pros and cons, decide if it's worth for you to do it because you save money, and also maybe you can negotiate with certain materials to say, you know what, if you go with us, it's going to cost you X, but if you have to do it by yourself, you realize it's going to cost you like X plus. So having that information, that data, could be really useful in the negotiation phase.
Isabelle, I know your last slide, 2 minutes.
Perfect. So start collecting data immediately, your household count, but not only, like, consider residents, apartments, cottages, small businesses if you do collection there. So you have to provide this information. What is the cost for your contract and what portion of that cost is represented with recycling, and your tipping fee as well, because it should be covered by the materials as well. And share everything you can of that data with certain materials. To be perfectly honest, we had a base fee in New Brunswick. They said this is what is the minimum we will pay for collection per stop, so per resident in New Brunswick. And because Kent was transparent, shared all of that data, provided a house count, collection cost, what we expected to receive, and what was the portion we thought was representative of recycling, they said, okay, we will offer you a bit more. So we were lucky enough to have that extra money. And finally, know that it's okay to opt out. Choose the option that works best for your municipality, but make sure that the decision you make is made knowing all the info that is available. I will tell you a quick example. For us, since we had a 3-stream program, removing recyclables from collection would have no impact on our cost. We would have to pay the same to collect less material. But other regions, because they only have like a blue cart and a garbage cart, a black cart, that represented 50% of their cost that they saved because they removed 1 week of collection. So they only had to collect the garbage every other week. And certain materials could not match that 50% when they offered them an amount per resident. So because of that, they said, well, it's better for us to opt out because we will have more savings than if you pay us to do your work and potentially face penalties for contamination rate. So for us, it was a no-brainer. We knew that we would, and we are facing increases in collection costs. It was a no-brainer that opting out was the best decision financially for our taxpayers. But that's not the case for everyone. And that's it for me. I had a slide for question, but I know that it's going to be at the very end. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Isabelle. And that's a great segue into our third panelist, who is a community that has decided to opt out. And you'll hear that this is this community, the origin of the Blue Box program was in Waterloo region. So over to you, Deanna.
Thank you very much. And I'll get my screen up and going.
And as you get going there, Deanna, I know we're running a little bit behind, so hopefully you can hang in for the questions.
Yep.
We've got a really great perspectives from all of our speakers. Go ahead.
Okay, and just to let folks know, I'm having internet issues, so I'm going to turn off my video. Hope that helps. And Beth, just give me a thumbs up if you can see my slideshow. Perfect. Okay, and I'll go quickly over some parts of my slides of my fellow presenters have already touched on it. So who we are, so my name is Deanna Dakin. I'm project manager for the waste management division at the region of Waterloo. We are located in southwestern Ontario. For all our Western colleagues who are on the phone, and I think there's some Eastern people as well. So here we are. We're about 100 kilometers west of Mississauga, 100 kilometers from London and Hamilton as well. We are made up of 3 cities and 4 townships. We have a geographic area of 1,400 square kilometers. As mentioned, we are an upper tier municipality, so the 3 cities and 4 townships. We have 675 residents. We provide curbside collection to approximately 165,000 households. We have 1 active landfill located, actually it's uniquely located parts in the city of Waterloo, city of Kitchener, and Township of Wilmot. It's all 1 landfill. We have several closed landfills and 2 active transfer stations. Currently, we sit at approximately 63% diversion of all of our waste. As Beth mentioned, we are home of the Blue Box. It started in a small community in the city of Kitchener, late 70s, early 80s. And also Waterloo region is the fastest growing urban area in Canada in 2023. So we have lots of growth in our area. We currently provide unlimited weekly blue box and green bin collection to our residential single family homes. We have limited every other week garbage and bulky item collection, limited to 3 items or bags. Unlimited every other week yard waste collection seasonally from March to November, and a holiday Christmas tree collection for 2 weeks in January. We do provide downtown waste collection to 10 specific downtowns. So some areas have more than 1 downtown. 2 different levels of service. The cities have a 6-day-a-week garbage collection, theoretically a 10-bag limit. Basically everything is cleared. They have weekly blue box and enhanced cardboard collection. Again, it is unlimited. We have no green bin, bulky item, or yard waste collection for our businesses. And in the downtowns in our townships, rural areas, we have weekly collection that does mirror the residential collection. We have very few locations outside of our downtown that we do provide collection. That is municipal facilities, places of worship, not-for-profit charity organizations. They basically get the residential curbside collection. We do provide limited multi-residential recycling collection, and there's some limits on cardboard that we have at those locations. So the transition details, as the previous panelist mentioned, it's been a long haul and it started well before 2021, but here are some significant milestones for us. The first initial information report deadline was September 30th in 2021. High-level information was reported to RIPRA, and a shout out to Melissa for spelling out that name so I don't have to do it. It's basically the number of stops we had, high overview of what our program looked like. Less than a year later, in August of 2022, very detailed, in-depth information was shared with RIPRA again, and it contained all the stops that we collected, special notes, every program information, all of our communication, driver training, program applications, everything went to RIPRA. July 1st, the first municipality in Ontario transitioned. The majority of those opted in on this date. We transitioned here March 2nd, so we're 4 months in. we opted out. We have curbside service. We have a convenience recycling depot at 2 locations, and we have non-eligible sites. So all of that continues, even though we've opted out. To the previous comments, our official contract was signed at the end of March, even though we transitioned in March 2nd. So definitely a delayed process. And a couple of highlights we're looking forward to: January 1st, 2026, the new province-wide program launches. A special note that no non-eligible sites will be in part of this process. So we have to find a solution for all those sites by January 1st. And then exciting for us here, we have a brand new curbside collection contract launching in March 2026, automated cart collection. So an overview kind of where we sat. The Region of Waterloo opted out, and some of the high level factors were just the unknown risks that we were being asked to take on, unknown contamination rates and the results of that contamination. There was little to no communication once Circular Materials submitted their first contract. We had questions, and really it was crickets, and we didn't get any response to any of our questions. And ultimately the risks were too high for our residents to continue with curbside collection. So we opted out, and that meant the existing curbside collection contractors continued service. For us in particular, we have 2 contractors. One services the Tri-City areas, one service the rural areas, the townships. The one Tri-City contractor co-collects blue box and green bin, and the township provider just collects blue box on its own, and that made it actually easier decision to opt out. Theoretically, all customer service is handled by our contractors now. Blue box and cart recycling container distribution is also handled by our contractors. We did agree to a joint communication plan with Circular Materials. So that includes we have a WasteWiz app, website, calendar, and some promotion at events. We also agreed to a joint service of recycling collection at our depots to continue during the transition period only. So behind the scene, this picture is a photo of our materials recycling center. It was the first community-sized recycling center built in 1991. It transitioned from a sorting facility to a bulk transfer facility. So our current contractors continue with the collection that they normally do, and they drop off the recycling at our site. We bulk load it into a hauling company secured by the pros, and it's sent for processing. We have no idea where it is, and we're not involved in that. We just bulk load it, and then our role is done. I will say there is increased scaling and documentation and audits that take significant amount of time. I think everyone underestimated how complicated the process was. We do have non-eligible sites, as I mentioned. So in our legislation, certain facilities are not included under the legislation, such as municipal facilities, places of worship, businesses. Interestingly, schools are included in the legislation, but daycares are not. And we've had a little bit of pushback from the daycares about the future of their service. I mentioned the majority of sites are located in the downtown areas. We have a special agreement only for the transition period to agree to collect these non-eligible sites with our current contractor until December 31st, 2025. We have to decide what's going to happen starting January 1st. Other information, I mentioned literally every piece of documentation, all our SOPs, our guidelines, our bylaws, everything was shared with RIPRA and Circular Materials. We continue to work cooperatively with our contractor to deliver new services in new development areas or new construction areas. So that's for single family homes, and then new multi-res buildings or dwellings on private roads. We have the same sort of cooperative agreement. It's understood that all new multi-res buildings will be added to the recycling program as of January 1st, 2026. Unsure if that will happen. So here are my lessons learned, and I actually printed this cartoon and put it by my computer. Really, there was so much information change happening, and the rules changed hour by hour sometimes, if not day by day. So lessons learned for contracts and agreements. So first off, let's talk about what went well. For us in Ontario, we have an organization called Continuous Improvement Fund, and I don't know if anybody is on the line with that organization, but a shout out to CIF. They literally brought all the municipalities together, and we had monthly meetings about what happens to depots, what happens to residential service, what happens to communication. And that really was the lifeline for a lot of us to learn from the experiences. We did have a great relationship with the communication team from the Pro, and they were very proactive and responsive to our needs. Staff were amazing. The unknowns dealing with this, and yet they handled it all with incredible professionalism. We're very lucky to have the quality of staff that we do. We have a great relationship with our contractor, and for all of you on the line, it might be too late, but really you should start building a strong relationship even before they have signed the official agreement. It's so important to continue that relationship for everyone's sake. And last but not least, really thankful Mother Nature did not throw a storm at us in March. And so we haven't really had significant weather that would test the new recycling system with opting out. So some of the challenges, a schedule for sure was delayed. We submitted our report on time as was required by the legislation, and the schedule for when the pros would be reaching out to us with agreements kept getting delayed and delayed over time. It is a stressful process with so many unknowns. Our residents, staff, contractors, everyone is under stress when you don't know all the pieces of the puzzle. Communication, a little bit of a gap between the information we submitted to RIPRA and circular materials and then what the contractor knew. So sometimes information didn't flow where you thought it was. The interpretation of the legislation is ongoing. So know the legislation. And I think Melissa mentioned it, but the complexity of the residential blue box program is completely underappreciated. It is far more complex than a lot of people realize. Other little lessons learned: start negotiation early within your own team if you can, purchasing, finance, legal. Understand your current agreement, read the clauses, all your force majeures, how to exit, how you update it, gather all related documentation. And lastly, do your own work first. So pros may ask for a lot of work for you to do. So for example, they asked us to provide them with the students enrolled in schools. Not our job, we don't have time, and we're not interested. So just keep that in mind as you get all these requests. Lessons learned: internal communication. I already mentioned, know the legislation. Also, you can't do it all yourself. Work with other municipalities to share resources. The one slide I think I borrowed from the region of Niagara. We're all in it together. We're all here to help. Keep a log of what's changing and send weekly updates to staff. Sometimes I knew I had mentioned to people on the immediate team, but forgot to update the larger division. We did proactively draft a communication plan that included internal communication. That was very helpful. And then lastly, you're through it based on the stage of transition you're at. Change starts the day it's announced, and embrace that journey. External communication, we did implement a full communication plan independent of the pros. They weren't interested in proactively communicating with the residents. So two things I'll just highlight here. We did a postcard. Did you know about the changes? We started with 1,500 and now we're up to 15,000 to get it out to our residents. Very helpful. Also, we have signs on site basically directing residents who show up. And don't forget, there's an opportunity to potentially cost share with the pros in covering some of these costs. So for operations, I think there was a lot of activity behind the scenes. So definitely clarify roles and expectations between the producers, the contractor, your role, and subcontractors. Be prepared to extend hours if you want to maintain the high level of customer service. The complexity of the data that is required by the pro is very, very high. So be prepared to spend time. The pros need to learn there's fluctuation in volume and stay on top of that before you get too much volume and you can't get rid of it. And again, recover your costs incurred in the process to help offset the fees incurred. So the impacts of transition. So again, we're just 4 months in, so we don't really know the long-term impacts that we have on the team. But social media, so this is just one example. Any social media post that had to do with the transition had like 5 times the amount of engagement that our average waste management post had. Our calls initially just for the month of March show about a 30% decrease, but keep in mind this call number does not reflect the slow start to yard waste calls. We had no significant weather. It does not reflect the complexity of the cases or the time spent. And lastly, our residents are pretty ingenious. They're sneaking in recycling complaints or questions in other areas, even though we don't give them an option for recycling. They'll do a garbage complaint and then say, oh, FYI, my blue box isn't picked up. So they're still there. It's just difficult to capture all of that. We had a surge in container distribution just prior to the launch. So blue boxes distribution went up 55%. But there were other factors in play. We, for example, increased our garbage to bag tag program in April, and that was the first increase since 2017. Green bin also went up by 28% during that same time period. There was a little bit of confusion around blue box distribution, and it still happens today. Residents don't know where to go. We did distribute it for the first month until the contractors were able to get their sites up and running. So our next steps, we still have a lot of work to do. Blue box collection at non-eligible sites, so the downtown and the few outside of the downtowns. Recycling collection at our depots, so beyond 2025. We are decommissioning the MRC, so we're moving all the equipment and deciding the future of that building. We do have to update all of our bylaws, review our bans and policies. All of our SOPs need to be reviewed. We do have a step to register as a producer to pay our fair share into the recycling program. Public space recycling is been quiet lately, even though it is a requirement under the legislation. So we're waiting to hear more information on that. And we have on our plate to assist our lower tier municipal colleagues to help them with this transition. One of the steps is registering themselves as a producer and also helping them understand the public space recycling, which will come in sometime in the future. So the last thing I wanted to share with you, and so Beth did mention it, the Blue Box program did start in Waterloo region. It is, we hold the Blue Box program near and dear to our hearts, and residents in the area do have an emotional connection. It is something that is ingrained in us, and we are very proud of it. One of the last things we did was just create this saying goodbye to the Blue Box program. So I'd like to play that now to the group, and I hope it works, and I hope the sound works.
Everything on the planet is recyclable. The Earth only has a limited amount of resources. Recovery of materials to reuse them or to recycle them helps to maintain a hope for our future. The Blue Box program originated in 1981 within the region of Waterloo. and is the first curbside program in all of the world. It was coincided on Garbage Day with a segregated outlet for waste diverted materials like pop cans, bottles, newsprint, cardboard that were separated from trash voluntarily by residents. Niall Ludolf was the gentleman that was on the back of a garbage truck as a thrower, and he wanted to look at these materials as resources and not as waste. He got approval to be able to begin just a small pilot project. It was just a street and it was just a cardboard box. It was not a broad range of materials at first, but it was a trial to see, will this take off with the public? It was popular. People were interested. They saw it. Their friends asked them about it. Well, how come you got that and I didn't? And so on. I never dreamed that people would catch on to this being a way of life. Municipalities were 100% responsible for the cost of the program. And then legislation came in to require the brand owners, the producers of this packaging, to pay back municipalities on a cost recovery basis for half of the program. The change for Waterloo Region is that the brand owners are now fully responsible to not just place the product into the marketplace in Ontario, but they are responsible to retrieve, collect, to process, and reuse that material based on targets that the province has set. That transition period has been over a 3-year period, starting in 2023, for a complete changeover by Jan 1 of 2026. The future will be a harmonized blue box program with the same materials regardless of where you live. It'll grow as the years go by when more materials become recyclable and technology exists to recycle them. The legacy of the Blue Box program will continue to inspire improvement, and that opportunity for waste diversion will become one source. And so that harmony will produce good results in the future for everyone.
Okay, and then the last thing I just wanted to share is our contact information. And to anyone out there, we have listed all of our council reports, anything related to do with EPR. I encourage you to borrow any material you like and just customize it to your area. And that's the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deanna, and thank you, Melissa and Isabelle. I hope that this has given you some insight of how to use the materials that you're seeing now from circular materials and put some of those puzzle pieces together. And I think tying back to those the ARMA workshops as well, that the transition planning process and looking at all those various elements have been really well covered by all 3 of our speakers, and things that you need to consider going forward. I'm happy to open the floor to questions. You can either type a question in the chat function, or we're happy to take questions from the verbal questions as well. I might ask Tessa for help on that, on how you do that, and to unmute yourself. As we do that, I think I'll ask a question of all 3 speakers just to get things started. I'm going to go with the question of, now that you've gone through this transition, what do you think the biggest benefit of the EPR transition was for your community, for your community's other waste management programs? And I'll start with Melissa.
Thanks. It's an odd thing to say, but I think the biggest benefit was that there was no change to our services, to our residents, to the front-facing side of our program. From the administrative side, not having to manage a hauling contract was the biggest blessing we ever had. It was the most difficult contract to negotiate, to secure, and the most variable costs that we ever had to deal with. So to have that off our hands was a huge relief. And there was some some revenue changes. We were receiving more funding for doing what we've always done, but that was the point of EPR. Anyways, so that money didn't get anything new. It just allowed us to do what we were doing without a burden to the taxpayer.
Great, thanks. Isabelle?
I'd say that in New Brunswick, there were too many different programs when it came to recycling. So some region had, like we were one of the only region that would accept like styrofoam for recycling, and other region would not, and it would end up in landfill. So to have a common program all across the province, so wherever you go in New Brunswick, starting November 1st, the program for recycling will be the same. So that's a big advantage because on a communication perspective, our region overlap a lot. So we're a bit hesitant about doing promotion about our recycling system because we know that up north in the Miramichi area, they have a completely other system. But they have the same system everywhere will be a unified message throughout the province. Then obviously the financial incentive, having that money coming from certain materials to the commission. We have I think we're close to 7 million budget per year annually, but more than half of that is reserved for the solid waste department because of collection costs. So facing that increasing cost, and we have new contracts that are due this year, 2 contracts, so we expect sharp increase there. So to have this income coming from certain materials to our for the service we provide is a good break for our taxpayers. Money we can invest in a way better program that will serve our residents.
Thanks, Isabelle. Deanna?
It really is, we're just 4 months in, so it's really hard, but it is the hope for the unified material list across the province. We have 3 post-secondary education institutions here, and having students come in impacts the quality of the recycling. Hopefully we see some significant cost savings and increase in targets being met. So that's what we're looking forward to.
Great. You're still in the in-between period of getting over the transition work. Alex, I think you had your hand up first. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question to the panel.
Thank you, Beth. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your presentations. I'm here on behalf of the town of Hinton in Alberta, and I had some questions about how have you guys kind of managed the shortcomings of the provincial EPR program comparative to the previous recycling programs that you had offered to the town. Here in Alberta, we have a recycle depot service in Hinton. We kind of catered it to what worked for our community. And the perspective of many municipalities here is, okay, the EPR is a provincially regulated program now. It's the responsibility of the province to essentially manage how recycling is done. How much do the municipalities want to kind of get in the middle there and be the middleman between the service provider or be the service provider and circular materials and the province? And essentially there will be some service level changes. There may be stuff that we previously provided that is not covered under the new EPR regulations. How do you balance, maintaining a certain service level and transitioning to EPR? And what did you find that council's preference was? Was the preference to maintain existing service levels, even though there will be ongoing costs to the municipality that will not be foreseeably covered by EPR?
Deanna, do you want to start with that one since you've got the most impact?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So can we keep you updated? We will say, so we are doing an exhaustive review of the collection in our downtown areas. So that is the businesses and with some residents above. I will say That is more political than what I thought. There is this desire to continue to provide these services. And then on the other hand, there is the incredible sticker shock to provide this service. And we have a council report going in the fall of this year to council to say, okay, if we're going to continue to provide recycling for these small number of locations, and our processing costs are now through the roof and collection costs, you have a choice to make. 1,500 household or businesses when we have 40,000 businesses in the whole region who don't get any service. So where's the fairness there? But they are in our downtowns. So it's still to be determined, but I will say, do not underestimate the political sensitivity of reducing your service.
Great perspective, Deanna. Melissa, Isabelle, anything you'd like to add on that question?
For us, what we observed is less in a collection sense, but more in the list that was decided to become part of the EPR, part of the province. So what they decided was recyclable versus wasn't. In our region, the southeast region of New Brunswick, we were like really far, I mean, beyond some other region of the province, and we accepted stuff in our blue bags that other region didn't. And some of that material now will no longer be accepted starting 2027 because it's not part of the EPR program. And if we keep accepting them in the blue bag, they will be considered as contamination. And there may be penalties in 2027, who knows? So we're in communication with the province and also with other pros for other programs. Because, for example, some of the materials that is currently being collected curbside are small electronic that without batteries. So we accept them at the curb. It's not part of the EPR program, but we have another EPR program for electronics which have depots. But they said that there's a high percentage of the material they recovered that comes from Southeast New Brunswick because it's so accessible. It is directly at the curbside instead of going to a depot. And so we're really fortunate that we had a provincial meeting with all of the 12 regions of New Brunswick represented, and also all of the pros that serve the province. And those conversations happened for the first time, and they should have happened way before. Because at that moment, there was really a frustration from one pro towards the other pro that will refuse them material that they require to collect. So that conversation is happening. We hope that by 2027, we will have an answer, a firm answer that will say that, sure, you can still accept them at the curb. And if they appear in the audit, they will not be counted as contamination. But other material that is not covered by EPRs that we collect right now, that we recycle right now, will have to turn into garbage, which is a bummer at the end of the day. And people will see that as a reduced service and a reduced recycling at large.
Thanks, Isabelle. Melissa, quick
Sure.
perspective from you.
I was going to invite Deanna, get back to me in a bit, because we don't know quite yet what things will look like after our transition period. The regulation requires that all of our existing services have to be maintained and the same level of service. In 2026, that's no longer on the table, so we don't know what will happen there. And we could see we could see some significant costs for maintaining what we have now, particularly for what they call non-eligible source materials. And so that's our IC&I sector, which in our municipality is tiny. So the cost of operating an entirely redundant system for 2% of the materials we collect, and you can look at the math, 2% of 400 metric tons, we are talking such a small amount of material that would have incredible costs. Our council, though, so far has been very much on, we can't have any change to our level of service. So we haven't made a decision on the not eligible yet, but it was pretty much, we need to keep doing what we're doing. And we didn't get to the point where we actually had to say at what cost, because we were able to do that. But that was always my dread, was to be asked at what cost, and thankfully I didn't have to.
Thanks, Melissa. So lots of details to be worked out through the end. And I'm sorry we won't be able to do any more questions. We're coming to the time of end of our webinar. We've got all the contact information for everyone, and I'll hand things over to Jen for closing remarks.
Thanks, and I know Jason had his hand up patiently, and I know he has a few questions. So maybe we'll get the speakers to address his questions in the chat box or in an email afterwards. But wow, thanks guys. That was a lot of great information and a little bit of anxiety inducing, and I'm not even a municipality. So massive changes. You used language like fundamental shifts, extremely short timelines, you know, huge time and effort requirements. But yet all of you spoke to the front facing seamless changes. So, you know, kudos to you, and hopefully we'll have similar experiences on the positive side, not necessarily all the anxiety inducing ones. And reminders for those on the call, you know, don't be afraid to ask for what you need. There may be flexibility in the responses that you're going to get from the pros. Deadlines are somewhat flexible, it seems, given some of the examples. Don't be afraid to share your data and to work cooperatively. And those were kind of some of the theme messages that I heard. And thank you all for being a part of this webinar. And don't forget to fill out the survey at the end.